My Kinsman, Major Molineux, by Nathaniel Hawthorne. After the kings of Great Britain had assumed the right of appointing the colonial governors, the measures of the latter seldom met with the ready and general approbation which had been paid to those of their predecessors under the original charters. The people looked with most jealous scrutiny to the exercise of power which did not emanate from themselves, and they usually rewarded the rulers with slender gratitude for the compliances, by which in softening their instructions from beyond the sea, they had incurred the reprehension of those who gave them. The Annals of Massachusetts Bay will inform us that of 6 governors in the space of about 40 years from the surrender of the old charter under James II, 2 were imprisoned by a popular insurrection, a third, as Hutchinson inclined to believe, was driven from the province by the whizzing of a musket ball, a fourth, in the opinion of the same historian, was hastened to his grave by continual bickerings with the House of Representatives, and the remaining 2, as well as their successors till the Revolution, were favored with 2 and brief intervals of peaceful sway. The interior members of the court party, in times of high political excitement, led scarcely a more desirable life. These remarks may serve as preface to the following adventures, which chanced upon a summer night, not far from 100 years ago. The reader, in order to avoid a long and dry detail of colonial affairs, is requested to dispense with an account of the train of circumstances that had caused much temporary inflammation of the popular mind. It was near 9 o'clock of the moonlight evening when a boat crossed the ferry with a single passenger who had obtained his conveyance at that unusual hour by the promise of an extra fare. While he stood on the landing place, searching in either pocket for the meaning of fulfilling his agreement, the ferryman lifted a lantern, by the aid of which and the newly risen moon he took a very accurate survey of the stranger's face. He was a youth of barely 18 years, evidently country bred, and now, it should seem, upon his first visit to town. He was clad in a coarse gray coat, well worn but in excellent repair. His undergarments were durably constructed of leather and sat tight to a pair of serviceable and well-shaped limbs. His stockings of blue yarn were incontrovertible handiwork of a mother or a sister, and on his head was a three-cornered hat, which in its better days had perhaps sheltered the graver brow of the lad's father. I'll change this window here. What was I? Sorry. Under his left arm was a heavy cudgel formed by an oak sapling and retained a part of the hardened root, and his equipment was completed by a wallet not so abundantly stocked as to incommode the vigorous shoulders on which it hung. Brown curly hair, well-shaped features, and bright cheerful eyes were nature's gifts, and worth all that art could have done in his adornment. The youth, one of whose names was Robin, finally drew from his pocket the half of a little province bill of 5 shillings, which in the depreciation of the sort of currency but satisfied the ferryman's demand, and the surplus of a rectangular piece of parchment, valued at 3 pence. He then walked forward into the town, with as light a step, as if his day's journey had not already exceeded 30 miles, and with as eager an eye as if he were entering London City instead of the little metropolis of the New England colony. Before Robin had proceeded far, however, it occurred to him that he knew not whither to direct his steps, so he paused and looked up and down the narrow street, scrutinizing the small and mean wooden buildings. They were scattered on either side, This low hovel cannot be my kinsman's dwelling, thought he, nor yonder old house, where the moonlight enters at the broken casement, and truly I see none hereabouts that might be worthy of him. It would have been wise to inquire my way of the ferryman, and doubtless he would have gone with me and earned a shilling from the major for his plans. But the next man I meet will do as well. He resumed his walk, and was glad to perceive that the street now became wider, and the houses more respectable in their appearance. He soon discerned a figure moving immoderately in advance, and hastened his steps to overtake it. As Robin drew nigh, he saw that the passenger was a man of years, with a full periwig of grey hair, a wide-skirted coat of dark cloth, and silk stockings rolled above his knees. He carried a long and polished cane, which he struck down perpendicularly before him at every step. At regular intervals he uttered 2 successive hems, of a particularly solemn and sepulchral intonation. Having made these observations, Robin laid hold of the skirt and the old man's coat, just when the light from the open door and windows of the barber shop fell upon both their figures. "Good evening to you, honored sir," said he, making a low bow, and still retaining his hold of the skirt. "I pray you tell me whereabouts is the dwelling of my kinsman, Major Molineux." The youth's question was uttered very loudly, and one of the barbers, whose razor was descending on a well-soaped chin, and another, who was dressing a Ramil's wig, left their occupants and came to the door. Citizens in the meantime turned a long-favored countenance upon Robin, and answered him in a tone of excessive anger and annoyance. His 2 sepulchral hems, however, broke into the very centre of his rebuke, with most singular effect, like a thought of the cold grave obtruding among wrathful passions. "Let go of my garment, fellow, I tell you. I know not the man you speak of. What? I have authority. I have hem authority, and if this be the respect you show for the betters, your feet shall be brought acquainted with the stocks by daylight tomorrow morning." Robin released the old man's skirt, and hastened away, pursued by an ill-mannered roar of laughter from the barber shop. He was at first considerably surprised by the result of his question, but being a shrewd youth soon thought himself able to account for the mystery. "This is some country representative," was his conclusion, "was never seen the inside of my kinsman's door, and lacks the breeding to answer the stranger's civility. The man is old, or verily, I might be tempting to turn back and smite him on the nose. Ah, Robin, Robin, even the barber's boys laugh at you choosing such a guide. You will be wiser in time, friend Robin." He now became entangled in a succession of crooked and narrow streets, which crossed each other, and meandered at no great distance from the waterside. The smell of tar was obvious to his nostrils. The masts of the vessels pierced the moonlight above the tops of the buildings, and the numerous signs, which Robin paused to read, informed him that he was near the center of business. But the streets were empty, the shops were closed, and the lights were visible only in the second stories of a few dwelling houses. At length, on the corner of a narrow lane through which he was passing, he beheld the broad countenance of a British hero swinging before the door of an inn, whence proceeded the voices of many guests. The casement of one of the lower windows was thrown back, and a very thin curtain permitted Robin to distinguish a party at supper round a well-furnished table. The fragrance of the good cheer steamed forth into the outer air, and the youth could not fail to recollect, and the last remnant of his travelling stock of provision had yielded to his morning appetite, and that noon had left him dinnerless. "Oh, that a parchment 3 penny might give me the right to sit down at yonder table," said Robin with a sigh. "But the Major will make me welcome to the best of his victuals, so I will even step boldly in and inquire my way to his dwelling." He entered the tavern, and was guided by a murmur of voices and the fumes of tobacco to the public room. It was a long and low apartment with oaken walls, grown dark in the continual smoke, and floor which was thickly sanded, but of no immaculate purity. A number of persons, the larger part of whom appeared to be mariners or in some way connected to the sea, occupied the wooden benches or leather-bottomed chairs, conversing on various matters and occasionally lending their attention to some topic of general interest. 3 or 4 little groups were draining as many bowls of punch, which the West India trade had long since made a familiar and unshared potation, and became more taciturn under its influence. Nearly all, in short, evinced a predilection for the good creature in some of its various shapes. For this is a vice to which, as fast day sermons 100 years ago will testify, will have a long hereditary claim. The only guests to whom Robin's sympathies inclined him were 2 or 3 sleepish countrymen who were using the inn somewhat after the fashion of a Turkish caravanserai. They had gotten themselves into the darkest corner of the room, and heedless of the nicotine atmosphere, were supping on the bread of their own ovens, and the bacon cured in their own chimney smoke. But though Robin felt a sort of brotherhood with these strangers, his eyes were attracted from them to a person who stood near the door, holding whispered conversation with a group of ill-dressed associates. His features were separately striking, almost to grotesques, and the whole face left a deep impression on the memory. The forehead bulged out into a double prominence, with a veil between. The nose came boldly forth in an irregular curve, and its bridge was of more than a finger's breadth, with eyebrows were deep and shaggy, and the eyes glowed beneath them like a fire in the cave. While Robin deliberated of whom to inspecting his kinsman's dwelling, he was accosted by the innkeeper, a little man in a stained white apron, who had come to pay his professional welcome to the stranger. Being in the 2nd generation from a French Protestant, he seemed to have inherited the courtesy of his parent nation, but no variety of circumstances was ever known to change his voice from one shrill note in which he now addressed Robin. "From the country, I presume, sir," said he, with a profound bow. "Beg to congratulate you on your arrival, and trust you intend a long stay with us. Fine town here, sir, beautiful buildings, and much that may interest a stranger. May I hope for the honor of your commands in respect to supper?" The man sees a family likeness. The rogue had guessed that I am related to the major, thought Robin, who had hitherto experienced little fluctuous civility. All eyes were now turned on the country lad standing at the door, in his worn 3-cornered hat, grey coat, leather breeches, and blue yarn stockings, leaning on an oaken cudgel and bearing a wallet on his back. Robin replied to the courteous innkeeper, with such an assumption of confidence as befitted a major's relative. "My honest friend," he said, "I shall make it a point to patronize your house on some occasion when—" Here he could not help lowering his voice. "I may have more than parchment 3d in my pocket. My present business," continued he, speaking with lofty confidence, "is merely to inquire my way to the dwelling of my kinsman, Major Molineux." There was a sudden and general movement in the room, which Robin interpreted as expressing the eagerness of each individual to become his guide, but the innkeeper turned his eye to the written paper on the wall, which he read, or seemed to read, with occasional recurrences to the young man's figure. "What we have here," said he, breaking his speech into little dry fragments, "left the house of the subscriber, bound in servant, has the key in Mudge and on. When he went away, grey coat, leather breeches, master's 3rd best hat, £1 currency reward to whoever shall lodge him in any jail of the province. Better trudge, boy, better trudge." Robin began to draw his hand towards the lighter end of the oak cudgel, but a strange hostility in every countenance induced him to relinquish his purpose of breaking the courteous innkeeper's head, As he turned to leave the room, he encountered a sneering glance from the bold-featured personage he had before noticed, and no sooner was he beyond the door than he heard a general laugh in which the innkeeper's voice might be distinguished, like the dropping of small stones on a kettle. Now, it is not strange, thought Robin, with his usual shrewdness, it is not strange that the confession, an empty pocket, should outweigh the name of my kinsman, Major Molineux. Oh, if I had one of those grinning rascals in the woods, where I and my oak sapling grew up together, I would teach him that my arm is heavy, though my purse be light. On turning the corner of the narrow lane, Robin found himself in a spacious street, with an unbroken line of lofty houses on each side, and a steepled building at the upper end, whence the ringing of a bell announced the hour of 9. The light of the moon and the lamps from the numerous shop windows discovered people promenading on the pavement, and amongst them Robin hoped to recognize his hitherto inscrutable relative. The result of his former inquiries made him unwilling to hazard another in a scene of such publicity, and he determined to walk slowly and silently up the street, thrusting his face close to that of every elderly gentleman in search of Major's lineaments. In his progress, Robin encountered many gay and gallant figures, embroidered garments or showy colors, enormous periwigs, gold-faced hats, silver-hilted swords, gliding past him and dazzled his optics. Travelled youths, imitators of the European fine gentlemen of the period, trod jauntily along, half dancing to the fashionable tunes which they hummed, and making poor Robin ashamed of his quiet and natural gait. At length, after many pauses to examine the gorgeous display of goods in the shop windows, and after suffering some rebukes from the impertinence of his scrutiny in the people's faces, the Major's kinsman found himself near the steepled building, still unsuccessful in his search. As yet, however, he had seen only one side of the thronged street, so Robin crossed and continued the same sort of inquisition down the opposite pavement, with stronger hopes than the philosopher seeking an honest man. But with no better fortune, he had arrived about midway towards the lower end, from which his course began, when he overheard the approach of someone who struck down a cane on the flagstones at every step, uttering at regular intervals 2 sepulchral hymns. "Mercy on us," quoth Robin, recognizing the sound. Turning a corner which chanced to be closer to his right hand, he hastened to pursue his researches on some other part of the town. His patience was now wearing low, and he seemed to feel more fatigued from his rambles since he crossed the ferry, than from his journey of several days on the other side. Hunger also pleaded loudly within him, and Robin began to balance the propriety of demanding violently, and with lifted cudgel, the necessary guidance from the first solitary passenger whom he should meet. While a resolution to this effect was gaining strength, he entered a street of mean appearance, on either side of which a row of ill-built houses was straggling towards the harbour. Moonlight fell upon no passenger along the whole extent, but in the third domicile which Robin passed there was a half-open door, and his keen glance detected a woman's garment within. "My luck may be better here," said he to himself. Accordingly, he approached the door and beheld it shut closer as he did so, yet an open space remained, sufficing for the fair occupant to observe the stranger, without a corresponding display on her part. All that Robin could discern was a strip of scarlet petticoat, and the occasional sparkle of an eye, and the moonbeams were trembling on some bright thing. "Pretty mistress, for I may call her so with a good conscience," thought the shrewd youth, "since I know nothing of the contrary. My sweet pretty mistress, will you be kind enough to tell me whereabouts I must seek the dwelling of my kinsman, Major Molineux?" Robin's voice was plaintive and winning, and the female, seeing nothing to be shunned in the handsome country youth, thrust open the door, and came forth into the moonlight. She was a dainty little figure, with a little neck, round arms, and slender waist, at the extremity of which her scarlet petticoat jutted out over the hoop, as if she were standing in a balloon. However, her face was oval and pretty, her hair dark beneath the little cap, and her bright eyes possessed a sly freedom which triumphed over those of Robin. "Major Molineux dwells here," said this fair woman. Now her voice was the sweetest Robin had ever heard, the airy counterpart of a stream of melted silver, yet he could not help doubting whether that sweet voice spoke gospel truth. He looked up and down the mean street, and then surveyed the house before which they stood. It was a small, dark edifice of 2 stories, the second of which projected over the lower floor, and the front apartment had the aspect of a shop for pretty commodities. "Now truly I am in luck," replied Robin cunningly. "So indeed is my kinsman, the major, in having so pretty a housekeeper. But I am prithee trouble him to step to the door. I will deliver him a message from his friends in the country, and then go back to my lodgings at the inn." "Nay, the major has been abed this hour or more," said the lady of the scarlet petticoat, "and it would be to little purpose to disturb him tonight. Seeing this evening drought was of the strongest, but he was a kind-hearted man, and it would be as much as my life's worth to let a kinsman of his turn away from the door. You are a good old gentleman's picture. I could swear that was his rainy weather hat. Also he has garments very much resembling those leather small clothes. But come in, I pray, for I bid you hearty welcome in his name." So saying, the fair and hospitable dame took our hero by the hand, and though the touch was light, and the force was gentleness, and though Robin read in her eyes that he did not hear in her words, yet the slender-waisted woman in the scarlet petticoat proved stronger than the athletic country youth. He had drawn his half-willing footsteps nearly to the threshold, when the opening of a door in the neighborhood startled the major housekeeper, and leaving the major kinsman, she vanished speedily into her own domicile. A heavy yawn preceded the appearance of a man, who, like the moonshine of Paracelsus Disby, carried a lantern, needlessly aiding his sister, luminary in the heavens. As he walked sleepily up the street, he turned his broad, dull face on Robin and displayed a long staff spiked at the end. "Home, vagabond, home," and the watchman, in accents that seemed to fall asleep as soon as they were uttered. "Home, or we'll set you in the stocks by peep of day." "This is the second hint of the kind," thought Robin. I wish they would end my difficulties by setting me there tonight." Nevertheless, the youth felt an instinctive antipathy towards the guardian of midnight order, which at first prevented him from asking his usual question. But just when the man was about to vanish behind the corner, Robin resolved not to lose the opportunity, and shouted lustily after him, "I say, friend, will you guide me to the house of my kinsman, Major Molineux?" The watchman made no reply, but turned the corner and was gone. Yet Robin seemed to hear the sound of drowsy laughter stealing along the solitary street. At the moment, also, a pleasant titter saluted him from the open window above his head. He looked up and caught the sparkle of a saucy eye. A round arm beckoned to him, and next he heard light footsteps descending the staircase within. But Robin, being the household of a New England clergyman, was a good youth, as well as a shrewd one. So he resisted temptation and fled away. He now roamed desperately and at random through the town, almost ready to believe that a spell was on him, like that by which a wizard of his country had once kept 3 pursuers wandering a whole winter night within 20 paces of the cottage which they sought. The streets lay before him, strange and desolate, and the lights were extinguished in almost every house. Twice, however, little parties of men, among whom Robin distinguished individuals in outlandish attire, came hurrying along. But though on both occasions they paused to address him, such an intercourse did not at all enlighten his perplexity. They did but utter a few words in some language of which Robin knew nothing, and perceiving his inability to answer, bestowed a curse upon him in plain English, and hastened away. Finally the lad determined to knock at the door of every mansion that might appear worthy to be occupied by his kinsman, trusting that perseverance would overcome the fatality and had hitherto thwarted him. Firm in this resolve, he was passing beneath the walls of the church, which formed the corner of the two streets, when as they turned into the shade of his steeple, he encountered a bulky stranger, muffled in a cloak. The man was proceeding with the speed of earnest business, but Robin planted himself full before him, holding the oak cudgel with both hands across his body, as a bar to further passage. "Halt, honest man, and answer me a question," said he, very resolutely. "Tell me this instant, whereabouts is the dwelling of my major kinsman, Major Molineux? Keep your tongue between your teeth, fool, and let me pass." And a deep gruff voice, which Robin partly remembered, "Let me pass, I say, or I'll strike you to the earth." "No, no, neighbor," cried Robin, flourishing his cudgel, and thrusting its larger end close to the man's muffled face. "No, no, I am not the fool you take me for, nor do you pass till I have an answer to my question. Whereabouts is the dwelling of my kinsman, Major Molineux?" The stranger, instead of attempting to force his passage, stepped back into the moonlight, unmuffled his face, and stared full into that of Robin. "Watch here an hour," said Major Molineux, "and Major Molineux will pass by," said he. Robin gazed with dismay and astonishment on the unprecedented physiognomy of the speaker. The forehead, with its double prominence and broad hook nose, the shaggy eyebrows and fiery eyes, were those which he had noticed at the inn, but the man's complexion had undergone a singular, or more properly a twofold change. One side of the face blazed an intense red, while the other was black as midnight, the division line being in the broad bridge of the nose, and the mouth, which seemed to extend from ear to ear, was black or red, in contrast to the color of the cheek. The effect was as if two individual devils, a fiend of fire and a fiend of darkness, had united themselves to form this infernal visage. The stranger grinned at Robin's face, muffled his party-colored features, and was out of sight in a moment. "Strange things we travelers see," ejaculated Robin. He seated himself, however, upon the steps of the church door, resolving to wait the appointed time for his kinsman. A few moments were consumed in philosophical speculations upon the species of the genus Homo, who had just left him. Having settled the point shrewdly, rationally, and satisfactorily, he was compelled to look elsewhere for his amusement, and first he threw his eyes along the street. It was more respectable appearance than most of those into which he had wandered, and the moon, creating, like the imaginative power, a beautiful strangeness in familiar objects, gave something of romance to a scene that might not have possessed it in the other day. The irregular and often quaint architecture of the houses, some of whose roofs were broken into numerous little peaks, while others ascended, steep and narrow, into a single point, and others, again, were square, the pure milk white of some of their complexions, the aged darkness of others, and the thousand sparklings reflected from bright substances in the walls of many. These matters engaged Robin's attention for a while, and then began to grow wearisome. Next he endeavored to define the forms of distant objects starting away, with almost ghostly indistinctness, just as his eye appeared to grasp them, and finally he took a minute survey of the edifice which stood on the opposite side of the street, directly in front of the church door where he was stationed. It was a large square mansion, distinguished from its neighbors by a balcony which rested on tall pillars, and by an elaborate Gothic window communicating therewith. "Perhaps this is the very house I had been seeking," thought Robin. Then he strove to speed away the time by listening to a murmur which swept continually along the street, yet was scarcely inaudible except to an unaccustomed ear like his. It was a low, dull, dreamy sound, compounded by many noises, each of which was at too great a distance to be separately heard. Robin marveled at this snore of a sleeping town, and marveled more whenever its continuity was broken. By now and then a distant shout, apparently loud where it originated, but altogether it was a sleep-inspiring sound, and to shake off its drowsy influence, Robin arose and climbed a window frame, that he might view the interior of the church. There the moonbeams came trembling in, and fell down upon the deserted pews, and extended along the quiet aisles. A fainter yet more awful radiance was hovering around the pulpit, and one solitary ray had dared to rest upon the opened page of the great Bible, had natured in that deep hour, becoming a worshipper in the house which man had builded? Or was that heavenly light the visible sanctity of the place, visible because no earthly and impure feet were within its walls? The scene made Robin's heart shiver with a sensation of loneliness stronger than he had ever felt in the remotest depths of his native woods. So he turned away and sat down again before the door. There were graves around the church, and now an uneasy thought obtruded into Robin's breast. What if the object of his search, which had been so often and so strangely thwarted, were all the time mouldering in his shroud? What if his kinsman should glide through the yonder gate and nod and smile to him in dimly passing by? Oh, that any breathing thing were here with me, said Robin. Recalling his thoughts from this uncomfortable track, he sent them over forest, hill, and stream, and attempted to imagine how that evening of ambiguity and weariness had been spent by his father's household. He pictured them assembled at the door, beneath the tree, the great old tree, which had been sparred for its huge, twisted trunk and venerable shade, when 1,000 leafy brethren fell. There, at the going down of the summer sun, it was his father's custom to perform domestic worship, and the neighbors might come and join with him like brothers of the family, and that the wayfaring man might pause to drink at that fountain, and keep his heart pure by freshening the memory of home. Robin distinguished the seat of every individual of the little audience. He saw the good man in the midst, holding the scriptures in the golden light that shone from the western clouds. He beheld him close the book, and rise up to pray. He heard the old thanksgivings for daily mercies, the old supplications for their continuance, to which he had so often listened to in weariness, but which were now among his dear remembrances. He perceived the slight inequality of his father's voice when he came to speak of the absent one. He noted now his mother turned her face to the broad and knotted trunk, how his elder brother scorned because the beard was rough upon his upper lip to permit his features to be moved, how the younger sister drew upon a low-hanging branch before her eyes, and how the little one of all, whose spirits had hitherto broken the decorum of the scene, understood the prayers of her playmate, and burst into clamorous grief. Then he saw them go at the door, and when Robin would have entered also, the latch tinkled into its place, and he was excluded from his home. "Am I here or there?" cried Robin, starting. For all at once, when his thoughts had become visible and audible in a dream, the long wide solitary streets shone out before him. He roused himself and endeavored to fix his attention steadily upon the large edifice which he had surveyed before. But still his mind kept vibrating between fancy and reality. By turns, the pillars of the balcony lengthened into tall, bare stems of pines, dwindled down to human figures, settled again into their true shape and size, and then commenced a new succession of changes. For a single moment, when he deemed himself awake, he could have sworn that a visage, one which he seemed to remember, yet could not absolutely name as his kinsman, was looking towards him from the Gothic window. A deeper sleep wrestled with and nearly overcame him. but fled at the sound of footsteps along the opposite pavement. Robin rubbed his eyes and discerned a man passing at the foot of the balcony, and addressed him with a loud, peevish, and lamentable cry. "Hello, friend! Must I wait here all night for my kinsman, Major Molineux?" The sleeping echoes awoke, and answered his voice, and the passenger, barely able to discern a figure sitting in the oblique shade of the steeple, traversed the street to obtain a nearer view. He was himself a gentleman in his prime, of open, intelligent, cheerful, and altogether prepossessing countenance. Perceiving a country youth, apparently homeless and without friends, he accosted him in a tone of real kindness, which had become strange to Robin's ears. "Well, my good lad, why are you sitting here?" inquired he. "Can I be of service to you in any way?" "I am afraid not, sir," replied Robin, despondingly. "Yet I shall take it kindly, if you'll answer me a single question. I have been searching half the night for one Major Molineux now, sir. Is there really any such person in these parts, or am I dreaming?" "Major Molineux. The name is not altogether strange to me, and said the gentleman, smiling. "Have you any objection to telling me the nature of your business with him?" Then Robin briefly related to his father that his father was a clergyman, settled on a small salary at a long distance back in the country, and that Major Molineux were brothers' children. The Major, having inherited riches and acquired civil and military rank, had visited his cousin in great pomp a year or two before, had manifested much interest in Robin, and the elder brother, being childless himself, had thrown out hints respecting the future establishment of one of them in life. The elder brother was destined to succeed in the farm, which his father cultivated in the interval of sacred duties. It was therefore determined that Robin should profit by his kinsman's generous attentions, especially as he seemed to be rather the favorite, and was thought to possess other necessary endowments. "For I have the name of being of shrewd youth," observed Robin, in this part of the story. "I doubt not you deserve it," replied his new friend, good-naturedly. "But pray proceed." "Well, sir, being nearly 18 years old and well grown, as you see," continued Robin, drawing himself up to his full height, "I thought it high time to begin the world. So my mother and her sister put me in handsome trim, and my father gave me half the remnant of last year's salary, and 5 days ago I started for this place, to pay the Major a visit. But would you believe it, sir, I crossed the ferry a little after dusk, and have yet found nobody that would show me the way to his dwelling. Only an hour or two since I was told to wait there, and Major Molineux would pass by." "Can you describe the man who told you this?" inquired the gentleman. "Oh, he was an ill-favored fellow, sir," replied Robin, "with two great bumps on his forehead, a hook nose, fiery eyes, and what struck me as the strangest, his face was of two different colors. Did you happen to know such a man, sir?" "Not intimately," answered the stranger, "but I chanced to meet him a little time previous to your stopping me. I believe you may trust his word, and that the Major will shortly pass through the street. In the meantime, as I have a singular curiosity to witness your meeting, I'll sit down here upon the steps and bear you company." He seated himself accordingly, and soon engaged his companion in animated discourse. It was but a brief continuance, however, for a noise of shouting which had long been remotely audible, drew so much nearer that Robin inquired its cause. "What may be the meaning of this uproar?" asked he. "Truly, if your town will always be as noisy, I shall find little sleep, while I am an inhabitant. Why, indeed, friend Robin, there do appear to be 3 or 4 riotous fellows abroad to-night," replied the gentleman. "You must not expect all the stillness of your native woods here in our streets, but the watch will shortly be at the heels of these lads, and set them in the stocks by peep of day," interrupted Robin. recollecting his own encounter with the drowsy lantern-bearer. "But, dear sir, if I may trust my ears, an army of watchmen would never make head against such a multitude of rioters. There were at least 1,000 voices went to make up that one shout." "May not a man have several voices, Robin, as well as 2 complexions?" said his friend. "Perhaps a man may, but heaven forbid that a woman should," responded the shrewd youth, thinking of the seductive tones of the Major's housekeeper. The sounds of a trumpet in some neighboring street now became so evident and continual, that Robin's curiosity was strongly excited. In addition to the shouts, he heard frequent bursts from many instruments of discord, and a wild and confused laughter filled up the intervals. Robin rose from the steps and looked wistfully towards the point, whither several people seemed to be hastening. "Surely some prodigious merrymaking is going on," exclaimed he. "I have laughed very little since I left home, sir, and should be sorry to lose an opportunity. Shall we just step round the corner in that darkish house and take our share of the fun?" "Sit down again, sit down, good Robin," replied the gentleman, laying his hand on the skirt of the grey coat. "You forget that we must wait here for your kinsman. There is reason to believe that he will pass by in the course of very few moments." The near approach of the uproar had now disturbed the neighborhood. Windows flew open on all sides, and many heads, in the attire of the pillow, and confused by sleep suddenly broken, were protruded to the graves of whoever had leisure to observe them. Eager voices hailed each other from house to house, all demanding the explanation which not a soul could give. Half-dressed men hurried towards the unknown commotion, stumbling as they were over the stone steps, and thrust themselves into the narrow footwalk. The shouts, the laughter, and the tuneless bray, the antipodes of music, came onward with increasing din, till scattered intervals, and then denser bodies, began to appear round the corner. At a distance of 100 yards, "Will you recognize your kinsman, Robin, if he passes in this crowd?" inquired the gentleman. "Indeed, I can't warrant it, sir, but I'll take my stand here, and keep a bright look out," answered Robin, descending to the outer edge of the pavement. A mighty stream of people now emptied into the street, and came rolling slowly towards the church. A single horseman wheeled the corner of the midst of them, and close behind him came a band of fearful wind instruments, sending forth a fresher discord. Now that no intervening buildings kept it from the air, then a redder light disturbed the moonbeams, and a dense multitude of torches shone along the street, concealing by their glare whatever object they illuminated. This single horseman, clad in military dress and bearing a drawn sword, rode onward as the leader, and by his fierce and variegated countenance appeared like a war personified. The red of one cheek was an emblem of fire and sword. The blackness of the other betokened the mourning that attends them. In his train were wild figures in Indian dress and many fantastic shapes, without a model, giving the whole march a visionary air, as if a dream had broken forth from some feverish brain, and were sweeping visibly through the midnight streets. A mass of people inactive, except as applauding spectators, hemmed the procession in, and several women ran along the sidewalk, piercing the confusion of heavier sounds, with their shrill voices of mirth or terror. "A double-faced fellow has his eye upon me," muttered Robin, with an indefinite but uncomfortable idea that he was himself to be a bear, a part in pageantry. The leader turned himself in the saddle and fixed his glance full upon the country youth, as the steeds went slowly by. When Robin had freed his eyes from those fiery ones, the musicians were passing before him, and the torches were close at hand. But the unsteady brightness of the latter formed a veil which he could not penetrate. The rattling of wheels over the sounds sometimes found its way to the ear, and confused traces of a human form appeared at intervals. then melted into the vivid light. A moment more, and the leader thundered a command to halt. The trumpets vomited a horrific breath and held their peace. The shouts of laughter of the people died away, and there remained only a universal hum, allied to silence. Right before Robin's eyes was an uncovered cart. There the torches blazed the brightest. There the moon shone out like day. And there, in tar and feathery dignity, sat his kinsman, Major Molineux. He was an elderly man of large and majestic person, and strong, square features betokening a steady soul. But steady as it was, his enemies had found means to shake it. His face was pale at death, and far more ghastly. The broad forehead was contracted in his agony, so that his eyebrows formed one grizzled line. His eyes were red and wild, and the foam hung white upon his quivering lip. His whole frame was agitated by a quick and continual tremor, which his pride strove to quell. And even those circumstances of overwhelming humiliation, perhaps the bitterest pang of all was when his eyes met those of Robin, for he evidently knew him on the instant, as the youth stood witnessing this foul disgrace of the head grown gray in honor. They stared at each other in silence, and Robin's knees shook, his hair bristled, with a mixture of pity and terror. Soon, however, a bewildering excitement began to seize upon his mind. The preceding adventures of the night, and the unexpected appearance of the crowd, the torches, the confused din, and the hush that followed, the spectre of the kinsman, reviled by the great multitude, all this, and more than all, a perception of tremendous ridicule in the whole scene, affected him with a sort of mental inebriety. At that moment, a voice of sluggish merriment saluted Robin's ears. He turned instinctively, and just behind the corner of the church stood the lantern-bearer, rubbing his eyes and drowsily enjoying the lad's amazement. And he heard a peal of laughter, like the ringing of silvery bells. A woman twitching his arm, a saucy eye met his. He saw the lady of the scarlet petticoat. A sharp, dry cachinnation appealed to his memory, and standing on tiptoe in the crowd, with his white apron over his head, he beheld a courteous little innkeeper. And lastly, there sailed over the heads of the multitude a great broad laugh, broken in the midst by two sepulchral hems, thus: ha, 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 hem, hem, ha, 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 ha. The sound proceeded from the balcony of the opposite edifice, and thither Robin turned his eyes. In front of the Gothic window stood the old citizen, wrapped in a wide gown, his grey periwig exchanged for a nightcap, which was thrust back from his forehead, and his silk stockings hanging down about his legs. He supported himself on his polished cane in a fit, convulsive merriment, which manifested itself in his solemn old features, like a funny inscription on a tombstone. Then Robin seemed to hear the voices of the barbers, of the guests of the inn, of all who had made sport of him that night. The contagion was spreading among the multitude, when all at once it seized upon Robin, and he sent forth a shout of laughter that echoed through the street. Every man shook his sides, every man emptied his lungs, but Robin's shout was loudest there. The cloud spirits peeped from the silvery islands, and the congregated mirth went roaring up to the sky. The man in the moon heard the far below. "Oh ho," quoth he, "the old earth is frolicsome tonight." When there was a momentary calm in that tempestuous sea of sound, the leader gave the sign. The procession resumed its march. On they went like fiends that throng in mockery around some dead potentate, mighty no more, but majestic still in his agony. On they went in counterfeited pomp, in senseless uproar, in frenzied merriment, trampling all on an old man's heart, unswept the tumult, and left a silent street behind. "Oh, Robin, are you dreaming?" inquired the gentleman, laying his hand on the youth's shoulder. Robin started, and withdrew his arm from the stone post, to which he had instinctively clung, while the living stream rolled by him. His cheek was somewhat pale, and his eye not quite as lively as the earlier part of the evening. "Will you be kind enough to show me the way to the ferry?" said he after a moment's pause. "You have then adopted a new subject of inquiry," observed the companion with a smile. "Why, yes, sir," replied Robin, rather dryly. "Thanks to you and to my other friends, I have at last met my kinsman, and he will scarce desire to see my face again. I begin to grow weary of a town life. Sir, will you show me the way to the ferry?" "No, my good friend Robin, not tonight, at least," said the gentleman. "Some few days hence, if you were to continue to wish it, I will speed you on your journey, or if you prefer to remain with us, perhaps, as you are a shrewd youth, you may rise in this world without the help of your kinsman, Major Molineux." So I don't really get what that was about. I have really bad reading comprehension skills, so I have close to zero understanding what that story was about. It made it sound like he was like trying to meet like some sort of mentor or something, and then like they're having like a party in the forest or something, having a party in some town, and like he didn't understand what was going on because he's like from a rural area. That's what I was gathering. Like there was like horns and ruckus and stuff. So it made it sound like he was having quite a time adapting to, I wouldn't even call it city life. I'd call it, more urban than he was used to. But it was more like city life than what he was used to. But it sounded like he grew up on a farm or like some forest area, and it was more. Again, my reading comprehension skills are zero, so this is just what I gathered from it. It sounded like he was having a difficult time adapting to a more urban environment. Lots of more people and ruckus, and, well, lots of more loud noises and stuff going around. I think, what was it? It was like a Wu-Tang Clan said, "Bring the ruckus, bring the noise, bring the ruckus, bring the noise, bring the ruckus, bring the noise." So I think Wu-Tang Clan said that. I don't know. I had no idea. I don't really understand what the story was. What I gathered was the main character, Robin, I don't think he understood what was going on either. He saw like a pretty girl in the inn, and then he waited on the step of a church for someone to come by, and they never came by. Instead, he just saw like some like wild, extravagant town. It reminds me how throughout the past 500 years, our world has become more urbanized. Again, I might be reading this story completely wrong, and my people have moved from farming life to cities. And that's been going on for the past 500 years, and it's still going on today. People are still moving from small towns to cities today. Of course, people live in medium-sized cities or medium-sized towns, or, people are moving to more denser and denser locations. And there's more ruckus in denser and denser locations. There's more stuff going on, and it takes some time getting used to it. Sometimes when you first move there, you have no idea what's going on. I grew up in a pretty major city. So I was used to loud noises. My bedroom was right next door to a major thoroughfare, a major avenue. There's lots of cars going on all night long, lots of cars moving by. So I grew up in a loud place. I'm used to being in a loud place. However, there's places a lot louder than where I grew up. There's places with nightclubs everywhere, and there's places with parties everywhere, and a lot more hustle and bustle than where I grew up. Even there was a lot of hustle and bustle where I grew up. I'm not going to dox myself and say where I grew up, but it was a major U.S. city. I grew up in one of the top 50 biggest metropolitan areas in the country. It's part of like a network of major cities. But yeah. So you could probably guess where it is. But if I give enough hints, because these people, they dox you on the internet. But anyways, so like if I moved into like New York or Los Angeles or somewhere like that, it would probably be even louder, and there'd probably be even more hustle and bustle going on than I'm even used to, because I'm not from like a metropolis, sort of a metropolis, but not. I'm not from like one of the top 10. Well, maybe the top 10, but there are bigger metropolises in this country than where I'm from, and there are bigger thoroughfares than where I'm from. So this guy seemed just hears like hustle and bustle from like far away. These like horns going off. So I can understand that. I can understand if you move to a big city. I moved to another city over the course of my lifetime, and it's about as loud as where I used to be, where I used to live. So it's not really that much different. So I can understand like things when you move, things could take some adapting. And it seemed like the guy was saying to him at the end, yeah, you might not find Major Molineux here, but you might find some other, extraneous affairs or some sort of strange fruit, not strange fruit, but like some sort of like strange, I don't know. You might find something else that you might like in this town. Even if you don't find Major Molineux, there's other stuff to witness in town, and this might be better than where you're from, because where you're from, there might not be anything going on, but here there's excitement. At least there's excitement here, whereas where you're from, there might not be anything major going on. So maybe this is a better place to live, because there's more hustle and bustle, it's more exciting. That's just what I got from the story. He wasn't used to the big city. It wasn't a big city, it was just a town. He's not from a town, he's from like a middle of nowhere, made it sound like. So it sounded like he was adapting to a more dense urban lifestyle, or urban for that time period. You realize 150 years ago what was considered urban is very different than what's considered urban today. Urban is a lot denser today than it was 150 years ago, but then again, specifically in the early 20th century, things got a lot denser. And then we've kind of spread out since then, and we might become more denser now, but it goes back and forth. But another thing of story I got was, sometimes you just have to fit into the crowd, and you just have to, I forgot the exact phrase, but do what the Joneses do. Just do what everyone else does, because if you don't, you just have to fit into any environment and be like water. Water fits into any environment, and then that's what I thought of the story. So just adapt to wherever you are. Just try to be cool, fit in, whatever you got to do. So that was called, that was called My Kinsman, Major Molineux by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Let me know in the comments below, what did you think of the story? Did you like it? I thought it was alright. I don't really understand what was going on in the story, but I think that was the point of the story, was you're not supposed to understand. The character didn't understand what's going on, so you're not supposed to understand. That's one of the reasons I used to struggle with reading growing up, was so many stories I didn't understand what was going on because the character didn't understand what was going on, so I used to get confused really easily. I still get confused really easily. So that's the story. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. I thought it was alright, I guess. I didn't really understand it, but whatever. So please subscribe to this channel to be part of the community, and please like this video. It really helps out the channel a lot if you like the video. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.